We've all heard how Democrats are spending $20 million on this Speaking with American Men initiative to figure out why young men did not vote for them in the last election. The goal of this initiative is to reach young men and entice them to vote Democratic in the next election. Democrats lost votes from men in 2024, and they would like to regain them and then gain some additional ground in 2026 and then going into 28. It's not really clear to me what percentage of that money is being spent trying to figure out why young, particularly white men, didn't vote for them in the 2024 election versus what percentage is being spent on outreach trying to entice them to vote for Democratic candidates in the future. And I don't know about you, but to me, when we're talking about the former of those two issues, why is it that young, especially white men under 25 didn't vote for Kamala Harris in the last election, and then to some extent didn't vote as heavily Democratic down ballot as well? It's concerning to me that Democrats need to spend millions of dollars to figure that out, and the answer isn't pretty glaringly obvious. So when I saw a piece last week by Michael Cohen on MSNBC.com, I was like, oh yeah, he also understands what's going on here. So right off the bat, Cohen is like, well, the Democrats are trying to spend $20 million on this strategic plan to help study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in male spaces. It's just anybody read that when that first came out and just feel like the Democrats are determined to be the most out of touch, perpetual losers. It's so frustrating to me. And I know I've made a few videos on the fact that the Democratic Party is basically a gerontocracy. I wonder how much of that plays into that. We have no idea why young men didn't vote for Kamala Harris. We can't figure it out. Why is it that white men under 25 wouldn't vote for a black woman? We don't know. No, we need to spend millions and millions of dollars to study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in male spaces. Ugh, okay. But Michael Cohen says, let me get into what he said. But polling data from the last 4 presidential elections suggests the root of the male voter problem and the potential solution might be rather straightforward. Before I get into what Cohen thinks and why I largely agree with him, it's important to note, depending on what social media spaces you are utilizing, that there is this portion of the Democratic Party who may be liberal or progressive or even further left. But they're all very white, largely male. In terms of the social media content that comes my way, it tends to be around 2 main issues. The Unfuck America tour and all of that drama, and not necessarily around the event itself, but also in the conversations that have branched off from what happened there. And I'm not going to get into all of that here. You are welcome to search it up on the internet and educate yourself. But this kind of, we need to not sweep conflict under the rug. We need to sit in our distress and work through hard issues. And when someone in the community comes to you and says, you know what, this behavior was harmful for the following reasons. This is a real systemic issue that we have going on. Racism, misogyny, we need to work through those things. And you're having other folks say, this is not the time, we need to have working class solidarity. Don't deal with these other issues. Don't wrestle with these issues. You're just causing discord. I mean, I would argue that conflict is healthy and working through that conflict is really important, and denying that it exists or saying don't talk about that is a good way to alienate really important members of your movement. And it's really antithetical to the cause of the Democratic Party. Well, at least to progressives. And then the other main place I'm seeing that, not a particularly dissimilar conversation, is when I am seeing Black creators talk about the ways that they feel that Bernie Sanders has not spoken into their needs and not represented them, and why they have not chosen to vote for him, and also why Bernie Sanders supporters have made them feel unwelcome. And then again, the inability to handle criticism and face real systemic issues and work through conflict in a healthy way. And instead of unpacking things like racism and misogyny and being willing to work through them, it's like defensiveness and we can't talk about this. We need to have working class solidarity. Nothing else matters. And I would argue, like, let's not forget that Black people and women are also part of the working class. I know there's this desperation to capture the white male working class vote. But I think for me, when I look at Democrats and leftists who are arguing around the Unfuck America tour and Bernie Sanders stuff online, it really highlights for me the way, this component of the political spectrum really doesn't want to face the lingering racism and misogyny that are both still so prevalent. We want to pretend like I vote for progressive causes. I couldn't possibly have any racist. I'm a man and I vote for, women's reproductive health care. I can't possibly be sexist. This, like, we shouldn't talk about identity politics. Being part of the working class is an identity. This kind of reactionary discourse lately around identity politics, because we're trying to lure back the white male vote, and they don't want to talk about identity politics because their personal identity doesn't fall under the auspices of identity politics. So let's just remember this prioritization of young white men and all of this reactionary discourse around identity politics. And the weird right-wing way of using identity politics as if it's like a really bad thing. You're using it like the right uses woke or social justice. So let's just hold on to all of that while we listen to what Cohen has to say. But polling data from the last 4 presidential elections suggests the root of the male voter problem and the potential solution might be rather straightforward. Support for Democrats among male voters dropped most dramatically when the party's presidential candidate was, wait for it, a woman, and then rebounded when the party nominated a man. But we don't want to talk about identity politics. People don't want to think about how there are men in the Democratic Party who are still misogynistic, who still really, really don't want a woman in charge. Now, of course, Cohen says you cannot know for certain, based on polling data, whether that was the deciding factor, a woman being at the top of the ticket, that caused those men to turn out in lower numbers. But those numbers do tell a sobering tale. According to Catalyst, which is a progressive organization that analyzes voter data, women supported Kamala Harris at nearly the same levels that they supported Joe Biden. However, the share of men backing the Democratic ticket dropped from 48% to 42%. And overall, there was an 11-point shift from Democrats to Republicans in the 2024 election. Now, it's not just white men, actually. For example, if you look at white and black women, they supported Biden and Harris at virtually the same levels in 2020 and 2024. But there was a 4-point drop amongst white men and a 7-point drop amongst black men. Latino support for the Democratic ticket fell across both women and men, but by men, it declined 5 percentage points more than amongst women. And here is what Democrats are really freaking out about and why they're spending $20 million. If we look at the voting demographic of 18 to 29-year-old men, in 2020, 55% of them voted for Joe Biden. In 2024, that support dropped from 55% to 46%. And again, in that young voter demographic, 18 to 29, it wasn't just white men. The Democratic ticket lost 10 points amongst young black men and 16 points amongst young Hispanic men. Also concerning is the fact that college-educated voters tend to vote more Democratic. But in 2024, Kamala Harris saw a 6-point drop in support from college-educated men over Joe Biden in 2020. That number slipped 1 percentage point amongst college-educated women. Now, in America, there's always been a gender gap. Women have always been more likely to vote Democratic than men. I mean, that's why Republicans try so hard to suppress women's votes. Why do you think they want the SAVE Act to pass? And according to Cohen, if you look further back, these kind of changes are really reflected between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as well. I mean, we could get into a conversation about how Hillary Clinton had no charisma and did not connect with voters. And I definitely held my nose and voted for her, but I was not happy about it. But again, I did what I felt was my civic duty. And if you look at the election data from Obama and Clinton and Biden and Harris, you will see that women voters, we turned out very steadily. Our voting for Democratic candidates did not really fluctuate during that time. But the male vote did. Obama, Clinton, Biden, Harris. It doesn't matter what the race or ethnicity of the men were. It doesn't matter what their education level was. If they saw a woman at the top of the Democratic ticket, they were less likely to vote for her, even if they voted Democratic in the last election. So as Cohen says here, as uncomfortable as it might be to acknowledge, the Democrats' problem with male voters might be solved with the simplest, albeit most reactionary of solutions: nominate a man for president. That absolutely would be reactionary, but I think the Democratic Party has ignored the amount of misogyny that exists amongst its male voter base. And we're not going to fix that. We're not going to fix that between now and the midterms. We're not going to fix it by 2028. That is a long-standing systemic issue in our society. So what do y'all think about that? As much as we would like to see a woman president, as many eminently qualified women as there are, including Kamala Harris, Is this country just not ready? Are Democrats not ready to vote for someone who's not a man?